Hi, everybody. I am Dr. David Perrodin, and welcome to the Week 6 Fireside Chat for Educational Leadership, 655 Pupil Services, and Non-Discrimination with Viterbo University. Week 6 begins on Monday, March 1st, and ends on Sunday, March 7th, 2021. Topics include school safety, preparedness, crisis management, and harassment. I received all of your learning team papers. I will grade those next weekend and then individually return them to your student files. So you'll be able to find them in the grade book. I've taken a peek and excited to get in and see the work that you've done on those. Continue to make robust and candid posts in the discussion threads. They've been outstanding. So let's keep that up. Just a few more weeks to go, and then we get to our research module. So for week 7, so this is week 6. Once we get into week 7, that will be the final week for discussion questions. Also look ahead. You'll have your research module, which is several weeks for you to assemble your final project. In the past, that had been a written project. Last year, I changed it so it could be either done in a phone call with me or else done as a written project. Most students chose the phone call. I'm assuming that will be how most students in this class will want to take that final exam, I guess, or present their final non-discrimination report. So I will be setting up a shared Google document soon in the next couple weeks, and then I'll have you go in and indicate times that you would be available for a phone call to complete that final project. That will happen from the end of March through early April. So it's nothing right now that you have to be thinking about. And I don't even know my schedule out that far in advance, but I will have a shared Google document and you'll indicate a time or times that would work for you, and we'll get that coordinated. So I also think it's a good option to practice verbal presentation skills. For example, at a board meeting, I expect you to have due diligence, that you've demonstrated that you've completed the rigor for that assignment, but also there is a certain skill in being able to communicate that in a verbal means versus, necessarily we talk so much about we inundate people with papers and reports and things like that versus a qualitative aspect of communicating out understanding. So I'm very much looking forward to that. If you do want to create the written paper, let me know, though. That option is still available. Week 5, review. A terrific discussion on the intersection of Plyer versus Doe and ICE operations. Former Attorney General William Barr's position was that ICE could defy courtroom sanctuary policies. So that was in play really up until the election in November. It doesn't appear to be what is in place right now under the Biden administration, but in the last 4 or 5 classes, this was definitely something we were talking about in a more rigorous fashion, because schools, for example, boards of education, were making proclamation statements about a sanctuary school, what school staff might be able to do if ICE agents were on campus. So it's one of those things just to be aware of, and also communicate it out ahead of time, because it's something that is going to rapidly develop in a district. You want to make sure that people understand how your district, what their position is on how to respond to this. So again, not as prominent as it was prior to November's election, but still something we should be aware of with staff. Human trafficking has been documented in all 72 counties in Wisconsin, yet we don't have enough professional development on it in schools and in post-secondary environments. It's starting. I've been asked by libraries, for example, to give presentations on human trafficking. So professional development is increasing in that area. But a number of you noted that it really isn't something our school has addressed with staff or with students. It might be something for your CISA to consider, for example, for professional development. So just continue to think about that. Privilege. So I wanted to share an example of a firsthand example I had of encountering privilege when I was attending UW-Madison in my doctoral program. And this was maybe 10 years ago. I was working with my study group, and we were at Memorial Library. It was maybe 9:30, 10 o'clock at night. And, time to grab some food, right? There was nothing at Memorial at that time other than, a vending machine. So the thought was, let's place an order and we'll go down and pick it up. But there was a problem, and that is no food allowed in the study rooms at Memorial, even though we're all adults, right? You couldn't bring food into the rooms. So instead of canceling the order, the students, my team said to me, well, we'll place the order, but you go down and pick it up. No one will say anything. And I said, well, what do you mean? No one will say anything? And they said, well, because we are brown and black and students, and you're not, and you're also a little bit older and a male, and just all of these things are they won't question you at all. If we went down there, yeah, they would tell us you can't bring it in and whatever, but for you won't have a problem. I said, really? This? And sure enough, I went down, the food was delivered, was outside, had the bag, it was very easy to see what was going on there. I think the logo of the restaurant was on the outside, and went and to the stairs and took it up to the study room, and that was it. There was no question or discussion. But I remember that was it was something, right, that just stuck with me, of how immediately they said, our best chance of doing this obviously is to put you forward as the person that retrieves the food. So it still is something that resonates with me here 10 years later. Week 6, reflective teaching annotation. Litigation. Yeah, litigation happens, not often, but it does. And when litigation starts in a school, a case will typically linger on for 3 to 5 years. So it is very important to have your documentation, to write down, as soon as you find out of litigation, if you're named in it, for example, that you're taking notes, you're keeping records of documents you have, because again, these aren't things that end in a short amount of time. Again, I've worked on cases that have gone 3-5 years plus. So make sure that you're time stamping things, and that goes back to professional development. Everything that you do, of making sure that you time stamp it. And if you are involved in litigation in the district might separate. Might say, well, as we're gathering this and you are named in it, we're going to have you on a leave. And at that time, then you won't have access to your email or your district Google Drive or whatever it is. And you're like, well, that's where I kept my copies of professional development, or the emails when I was, contacting staff about certain things that needed to be done, or this contact with outside agencies, or all of these things that are really your kind of support in this situation, right? It's all gone. Now, ideally, those things would still exist and be there later on for you to access, but they might not be, and you might not have access to those things. So this is something where I can't overtly come out and guide you on this, but one of the practices I always had and shared with my member checks was keeping copies of every email, every professional development, and so forth, making sure that I had those in my possession. I also think there's a way to do this that doesn't violate non-disclosure agreements, and that would be that keeping that type of information off site. For example, on a thumb drive or something like that, in case something happened to the district network. It gets ransomware and things. You've still got a copy of all of these things. And I think, once you, of course, exit employment, you're not sharing these documents and stuff like that. But I don't want to go further down the road. I'm not a lawyer. I don't want to give you specific advice on this, but I want you to have this thought of when you are doing things, that you have copies of these things, and that you would have those available to you if you were separated from access to your email or your drive. So again, in a non-disclosure agreement, for example, you probably have one right now with your school district, and it might say something that, if you've created something while you've been employed with the district, you can't share that with anybody else unless you have explicit, directions from the district saying, yes, you can do this. So there, for example, are some things that I've shared in this class, which I did have permission, from the districts to share and out and things like that publicly. So, but that's where, NDAs also come in. So again, just being aware of that. A couple terms. What is discovery? All right. Discovery, if there's litigation, discovery is asking for records, emails, right? Those types of things. Discovery could be asking for student handbooks, copy of your start of year training, Pupil Services Director, that you did for pupils for harassment and bullying, or your suicide prevention training. We want to know who this went out to, the day that it went out, what was the content of it, and how people were able to ask any questions of you, how those would be clarified. So those are the things that would be in discovery. Deposition is basically sitting down with legal counsel and it's being recorded, and then it's being interviewed, right? It's being asked questions. How did you know about your district's policy for suicide prevention, for example? How are you aware of students that came into your building from another building that had previously had threats of harm to self? How was that information communicated to you, to the staff in your building? What was the process if somebody did come in and they told you that a student was saying that they had intentions to harm themselves? Or what if, that somebody told you that another staff member, what is your policy? What is your practice for doing that? Or, okay, if you interview a student, what are the questions that you ask? Where do you keep the notes from that interview with the student? When do you make the determination to access third parties? And a lot of these things will also line into board policy, right? But those are questions. That's testimony. Deposition also doesn't happen just one time. It's usually multiple times over a period of time by different councils. So create that paper trail. Know your job description. Look at your job description. And if there are areas in your job description where, for example, it's saying, that Pupil Services oversees education of human trafficking, right? Of how to be aware and report human trafficking. You're like, whoa, I wasn't aware that was in there. Plus, then I need professional development time for this, or I need to attend conferences, or this is something we need to co-op with other districts to assemble this, or through our CISA. So make sure that there are things in your contract that you aren't fulfilling, right? So take the time to do that. I guess your job description. A litigation also, as I've seen the trend in litigation, it can be, if a parent is litigating against a school, it can be against a school board, plus individual staff members, administration. You're going to see there's a lot of litigation right now. I get contacted on a regular basis for expert witness, bullying, harassment, and threats of harm to self. Those are the top three. Bullying is the number one. So again, you want to be aware of that, because a parent could litigate against a school and ultimately say, well, this teacher decided to not follow the school policy or the school practice for reporting bullying. Like this student was communicating with this teacher. But the teacher did participate in the training, but then the teacher didn't go forward and do the reporting. So, you can find how these lawsuits, I guess, change, where they go from whole institutions of, was the institution not providing the professional development? Did they not have a system in place? Was it not accessible? To, yes, maybe they did have that. And maybe it was a staff member who was not following a standard of care or actually being negligent in that matter. School violence is complex, yes. But the Centers for Disease Control has the School Connectedness webpage. If you just type in CDC plus School Connectedness, always updating with incredible resources that are research-based. We don't do enough to talk about that in schools for professional development. And we need to do more instead of going to expensive conferences and hiring expensive presenters and so forth. Check out your resources on the School Connectedness page for the CDC. This week we have my IRB article, which was published last February. Ironically, I think it came out in April. It was like an early release in February, but it came out like in the midst of coronavirus. So at that time, everything had changed in schools. Schools were closed and kids were going virtual and stuff like that. So it's kind of a weird timing with that article because I had written it a few months prior to that. But this is something, that IRB article, I'm giving a keynote for a Texas conference on Friday. And this is something anybody can do. We talk about this in the superintendent class in fall. Every single district could and should do this at a district level, make it policy. And it would also align very well with your pupil services and non-discrimination policy, ensuring that all students, including students with disabilities and English learners, are included in safety instruction and safety drills and exercises. A question that you want to have for your attorney at the start of the year, remember, I said there's maybe 10 or 12 questions you want to have your school attorney address in front of staff. So you get these to the attorney ahead of time. And I do have those in an upcoming module that we'll look at. But you want to ask the question, if police, are investigating on campus, so let's say that it's a student who was in possession of a controlled substance, that student also has a disability. So like at what point are you doing a manifestation hearing? How does your investigation parallel what the police are doing? Are you sharing information during an investigation? So to get that very clear, and I think one of the things that gets lost too is where the manifestation meeting happens in that process, because I was involved in some significantly high-profile cases where the district never completed a manifestation after a sentinel school incident involving a student with a disability, and what that ended up doing is it really complicated things later, also for the school, for how they were providing services to the student, and also when there came to be in both of those cases. I'm thinking of some court hearings. But there is this responsibility, right? In all of our 72 counties, I'm in the county seat. If youth are incarcerated in your county and they have a disability, then the district of residents right there, so where I live, needs to provide services to those students. So for those of you who live in those 72 counties, your county seats, you would be providing services to those students who are incarcerated. Week 6 preview, school safety. Consider everything presented on how to provide inclusive safety instruction to all students. So I have my 2 PBS presentations in 2013. That presentation emphasized don't profile students, because we had vendors coming out and saying, here's a screener that you can buy as a district, and it will help you identify students who are likely to bring harm to others. And this was happening in some pretty big districts in Wisconsin. Going back and watching that presentation, you will see that suddenly, we had processes that were identifying thousands of students who probably were not at risk of harm to self or others, but maybe were into goth or rock music or things like this, and this big disconnect. Again, by watching both of these presentations, you're going to understand that, school safety really comes down to a local level of smart people making decisions and not outsourcing those to vendors. In 2019, we had massive marketing of fortifications, which we're seeing right now with COVID, all these devices to purify the air for hundreds of thousands of dollars. But so, and I was speaking to that, also wrote about that in School of Airs. There was no underwriter's laboratory for these devices coming into school. I testified it was Wisconsin Bill 44 that would have circumvented building codes and ADA for classrooms. Basically, it would have been a huge loss for students with disabilities. Imagine exiting a classroom, right? And now, so you can do this. You can barricade up a classroom, and in order to get out of a classroom after an intruder exercise or intruder in the building, the student has to turn a knob plus punch in a code on a keypad over here. So like part of the law for ADA access of in rooms and things like that in schools is that it's familiar, right? It's a one motion action to exit or enter. And the other part is that there is no multiple step part to it, right? So you don't have to do this, then this, then this in order to get out of a room. But that bill would have allowed that to be circumvented, so these things happen. They've happened in several other states. So again, I shared that in that 2019 PBS presentation. And I don't believe that will happen in Wisconsin, but the fact that it made it as far as it did before some, I guess, of the influential, people stood up, especially for students with disabilities, and said, this is absolutely a horrible idea. If you did this in a classroom with students with disabilities and did these multi-locking systems and a student got trapped in there, which I had documentation that did happen, you are going to significantly decrease the safety of these students and completely create a system which is unfamiliar to them versus every other system that they've ever encountered in their life, home, stores, whatever, things like that. So anyway, just to be aware of that. Those are excellent presentations. They do a good job complementing each other, so it's not redundant. Shoutouts! Da-da-da-da-da-da. It's shoutouts for week 5. Hilary spoke with her administration and found that there is no education for English language students specific about bullying and harassment. So I'm glad that you had that conversation, Hilary. And now that's a starting point for bullying and harassment. It also will help bring you into Act 309 compliance, that you can document that you have provided instruction to students who are English language learners in your district. And you did have, I forget what your percentage was that you noted, but again, this was something, let's say if this was some type of lawsuit, right? Something happens, and the question is, well, was there a responsibility for, the director to provide this? And you'd look and say, well, there were X number of students in the district, and that represents this percent. And yes, the district knew, right? They had English language services, and this is something that they were aware of. And so, we would look at this from a neglect perspective. Corey, you wrote, thinking back through my time from orientation to this school year, I have not received any information regarding trafficking or grooming. I would think that this should be a priority for many school districts across the country, as it has continued to grow worse by the year. Yeah, and it is. It's getting statistically worse by the year. Again, all 72 counties in Wisconsin. And again, you'd be amazed if you were looking at the small areas where this happens. So there is no place with, because of the internet that is immune from this. And the grooming, watching the video, right, that I did with Hector and Hector's research, how students posting, the student side of this with grooming and trafficking, posting pictures, and somebody, analyzes that picture. They can analyze the background. They know where that student was. They know what time that picture was taken, and they can, reach out and create these false profiles. And but it is extremely, it needs to be moved to our front burner and put there on professional development. Also, this should be part of your community health needs assessment, frankly. Like this, a hospital should be addressing this through the China. You also noted, Corey, there is this thing where people probably don't want to talk about it. Right. This is something that people don't want to talk about, but people need to talk about this, and it needs to be led by student services. Even if it's something on the back of bathroom doors, just starting out, right, in your school, of saying, if you are, a victim of grooming, professional development, your scope and sequence counseling of what grooming is, you can text, this number or something like that. But please continue to bring the questions up and address that in professional development. Ashley, A few things that you saw to address barriers, okay, to working with all families. One was to host things off-site. That not everything has to be at the school. You're right. Like, we can host things in the community, and also, different parts of our district. If our district is big, instead of always hosting in this part, maybe we host something out in a rural type area, which is also part of our district. So I think that also shows a vesting. And we had board meetings where for a year we held every other board meeting at a school instead of at the district office. And that was good, for staff because what would happen before the board meeting is the school counselors and then some students would be there. And what they would do is they would give the school board a tour of the school, right? And of course, they already knew the school, but to show them some of the things that, were being done in the school and whatever, so it'd be this little kind of 1 hour before the board meeting, building by building, to see how board policies and what was being discussed at board meetings at district office was actually manifesting out in the buildings. So also you wrote encouraging community members or students to run the meeting. Yeah, that's great. I mean, in a board meeting, right, you really can't do that, but there can be parts of a board meeting, presentations of, that can be led or co-directed. I did that when we were presenting our findings for our allergy policy, and we had some community input sessions, and I had interviewed some parents who had students with allergies, and I probably only presented 20% of that meeting, and the rest, were co-presenting. So it went really well. But yeah, excellent. Kelly, you had a question, or you're putting information out there about immigration and custom enforcement agents coming on campus, and you did some research and found that in 2011 there was a guidance document referred to as the Sensitive Locations Memo, and ICE officers and agents were asked to refrain from enforcement actions at least at the following locations and events: schools, hospitals, churches, funerals, and public demonstrations. So yeah, and so it's not as likely that there would be an ICE agent that would come on campus. I mean, it's significantly less likely now than it was a year or two ago. But again, we had Attorney General Barr was saying when some schools were coming out with position statements by their Board of Education saying we are a sanctuary district and we will not have ICE agents interface with students on our campus, and we're coming out with statements like that, right? And the ICE agents and General Barr is saying, well, we are federal and you're not going to have a state or a Board of Education statement which is going to be enforceable. I mean, we have ultimate authority in this. So again, this is something that I think I'll, maybe maintain another year or two in class and then bring this down or kind of fade it out of class a little bit. It was extremely relevant in the last few years. I'm not sure it's going to be as relevant going forward with the change in federal administration. So everybody, that is it. Thank you so much. And I'm looking forward to week 6. We're getting to the end here. We got just over a month left. So I did receive again all of your allergy group assignments, and I'll be digging into those in about a week. I'll have those back to you. I'll make a post into the updates section that I have done that. So take care, everybody. Warm weather, it's here finally. Dun, dun, dun. All right. Thank you.